Welcome to the debate. Imagine you and another builder are looking at the exact same architectural blueprint. You look at the schematics, the measurements, and the materials, and you construct a highly structured, perfectly symmetrical bunker.
Right, you're both working from the identical data set.
Exactly. But the other builder looks at the exact same lines on the exact same page and constructs a sprawling, multi-layered labyrinth. You're both looking at identical data, but the conclusions couldn't be more different. Today, we are critically examining the technical architecture of biblical end times prophecy timelines.
Yeah, specifically, we are looking at the deep, really structural disagreements surrounding the duration and the sequence of the final tribulation period. And this is an analysis designed specifically for students of end times prophecy who want to critically examine the real mechanics of these timelines.
Right, not just the surface-level summaries. The central question before us is this: does biblical prophecy mandate a traditional 7-year tribulation anchored by a linear reading of the book of Daniel? Or does it demand a complex 14-year period plus a 50-day prelude derived from reading the synoptic gospels as distinct, sequential prophetic calendars?
And this isn't just a theoretical exercise, This debate emerges directly from the conflicting prophetic frameworks presented by, two distinct camps. Specifically, the teachings of Robert Breaker representing the traditional view and the Ministry Reveal channel representing the expanded timeline.
And I will be defending that traditional 7-year timeline today. I'll argue that a straightforward, logically consistent reading of Daniel's 70th week provides, honestly, the most robust and biblically supported framework we have.
And I'll be representing the 14-year timeline. I'm going to argue that the true prophetic sequence is a complex fractal structure mapped intricately across the synoptic gospels. In this view, a 14-year duration is absolutely required to fully resolve the chronological mysteries of the text.
Okay, well, let's lay the foundation for the 7-year perspective first, because it relies on the overarching biblical pattern of sevens. Historically, we see a pattern where total human history spans 7,000 years. This isn't arbitrary. It's based on prophetic mathematics found in texts like 2 Peter 3.8.
Right, the verse that states, a day with the Lord is as 1,000 years.
Exactly. You map that onto the 6 days of creation, followed by a 7th day of rest. That gives us 6,000 years of human history, followed by a 1,000-year millennial kingdom. Then we cross-reference that with Hosea 6.2, which prophesies that after 2 days he will revive us, and in the 3rd day he will raise us up.
So you're taking those 2 days to mean exactly 2,000 years?
Yes, I am. And if we apply that 2,000-year block to the crucifixion of Christ in roughly 33 AD, adding 2,000 years brings us to the year 2033. Now, we know from the book of Daniel, specifically chapter 9, that there is one final unfulfilled week of years, a 7-year period of tribulation.
Okay, I follow the math.
Right. So you simply subtract that 7-year tribulation from 2033, and you find a tribulation start date around 2026.
It's a very clean mathematical equation. I'll give you that.
It is, yeah. This 7-year period, often called Jacob's Trouble, is cleanly divided into 2 3.5-year halves. It provides a logically consistent framework where the Antichrist rules, is defeated, and is immediately followed by a literal 1,000-year millennial kingdom. No gaps, no overlaps.
But here's the fundamental flaw with that traditional view, honestly. It errs by basing its entire timeline solely on the Gospel of Matthew. When you do that, you force all of prophecy into a single, highly restrictive 7-year box.
Well, I wouldn't say it relies solely on Matthew. It relies heavily on Daniel and Revelation. Matthew 24 just happens to be Christ's direct commentary on Daniel.
But it ignores the structural nuances of Mark and Luke. The 14-year perspective introduces what we call the was, is, and is to come fractal model. The end of days actually spans 14 years, preceded by a 50-day prelude known as the above period.
Okay, for the sake of the listeners, explain how you get 14 years and 50 days out of 3 gospel accounts that are, traditionally understood to be recounting the exact same historical events.
Because they aren't just recounting history, They are laying out a sequential prophetic blueprint. This structure is hidden in plain sight across the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In this model, Luke represents that 50-day prelude. Mark dictates the first 7 years, which correlated specifically to the opening of the seals in Revelation.
Wait, and then Matthew?
Then Matthew dictates the final 7 years, which correlate to the trumpet judgments.
So you are taking parallel accounts of Christ's ministry and placing them end to end like a chronological relay race.
I'm saying this layered approach actually resolves the apparent contradictions in prophecy that the 7-year model simply glosses over.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective, because the mathematical simplicity of Daniel's 70th week is not a weakness, it is its greatest strength.
How so? I mean, simplicity doesn't always equal accuracy.
Well, think of Daniel's prophecy like a legal contract. Daniel explicitly outlines 70 weeks, meaning weeks of years, or blocks of 7 years, determined for Israel. 69 of those weeks of years were perfectly, literally fulfilled leading up to Christ. Exactly 483 years.
I agree with the historical fulfillment of the 69 weeks. We're aligned there.
Right, so to suggest that the final 70th week suddenly fractures into a 14-year period plus a 50-day prelude, it violates the established terms of that contract. It violates the hermeneutic of the previous 69 weeks. We are looking at a unified narrative here.
I come at it from a different way. Prophecy isn't always linear. It scales. It's fractal in nature.
But slicing the Gospels up so that Luke equals 50 days, Mark equals 7 years, and Matthew equals another 7 years, that is like taking a single 3-act play and stretching it into an entirely new trilogy just because 3 different theater critics reviewed it differently. The Gospels recount the same prophetic warnings.
I wouldn't say.
Forcing them to run consecutively severely violates the unified narrative of the tribulation.
You call it stretching a play into a trilogy. I would counter that the author actually wrote a trilogy, and you've been trying to force it onto a single stage this whole time.
But what evidence in the text justifies reading them sequentially rather than parallel?
Well, the 7-year model completely ignores the highly specific, distinct wording across the Gospels. A perfect example. Look at the garments Christ is arrayed in before his crucifixion by the Roman soldiers.
Okay, the mocking of Christ?
Yes. In Luke 23, he wears a gorgeous, radiant white robe. In Mark 15, he is arrayed in purple. In Matthew 27, he is arrayed in scarlet. Traditionalists just say, well, the soldiers threw a bunch of different colored robes on him, or the gospel writers remembered the color differently. But these aren't contradictions or memory lapses. They are prophetic demarcations of distinct eras.
Okay, I have to ask, explain the mechanics of how a robe color dictates a timeline.
White, in biblical typology, signifies purity in the bride. Luke's white robe signifies the 50-day prelude, aligning with Pentecost themes of the church and the bride. Purple is the color of royalty and imperial conquest. Mark's purple signifies the first 7 years, the tribulation of the seals where the 4 horsemen ride out to conquer.
And Matthew's scarlet? I assume that's the final part?
Exactly. Scarlet represents blood, wrath, and judgment. That signifies the final 7 years of the trumpets, where Revelation explicitly describes fire and blood being hurled to the earth. When you respect that distinct structure, everything aligns. For instance, the mid-tribulation rapture, the great multitude we see in Revelation 7, occurs exactly where it should mathematically, right between the 7 years of seals and the 7 years of trumpets.
Let's follow the logical thread of your timeline for a second. Because if we accept that the structure changes so drastically from 7 years to 14 years, then the timeline of the tribulation's primary antagonist, the Antichrist, must also fracture.
It doesn't fracture. I'd argue it gains much needed clarity.
Let me challenge that. In the traditional 7-year view, the timeline of the Antichrist is consecutive and logically tight. He arrives on the scene as a human leader, the man of sin, who confirms a peace covenant for the first 3.5 years. At the midpoint of that 7-year tribulation, he is assassinated. He receives a deadly head wound.
Yes, the wound that is healed.
Precisely at that exact midpoint, Satan is cast down from heaven, enters into this slain leader, and he resurrects as the son of perdition. He then rules with absolute terror for the final 42 months. It is an uninterrupted 7-year reign of escalating deception followed by total destruction. It creates incredible narrative tension.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Your traditional model crams far too many disparate prophetic events into that single 3.5-year back half. The 14-year model perfectly explains the mystery of Revelation 17, the beast who was and is not and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit.
The is not phase. How does that possibly work in a 14-year model?
In the 14-year framework, the beast gets his 42 months of power during the first 7 years during the seals. At the end of the 6th year of the seals, he is actually defeated by the Lord and cast into the bottomless pit. This is the literal is not phase. He is gone. He remains in that pit for years.
Wait, he just vanishes right in the middle of the end times?
Yes, he remains in the pit while the temple is rebuilt on earth. He then reascends at the 10.5-year mark, which is the middle of the trumpet judgments, to wage war again.
And what about Satan's timeline in all this?
Well, this is where the math gets incredibly precise. When you look at the original language in Daniel 12:7 regarding Satan's time, the English translates it as a time times and a half.
Which is universally understood to mean 3.5 years. 1 plus 2 plus a half.
Universally understood, perhaps, but linguistically flawed. In the text, there is no conjunction between times and a half. The grammar actually calculates to exactly 2.5 years. Time is 1, times and a half is 1.5. 1 plus 1.5 equals 2.5.
I mean, that is a highly unorthodox reading of the Aramaic and Hebrew.
But look at how it solves the timeline. Satan only gets 2.5 years of the final 3.5 years. This perfectly leaves the final 14th year entirely clear for the Lord's return and the Jubilee reset.
But listen to the narrative implications of what you are proposing here. You are suggesting a timeline where the primary antagonist of the tribulation, the beast, is completely absent. He is not for several years, right in the middle of the so-called Great Tribulation.
Because he is in the bottomless pit.
Exactly. How does a global tribulation maintain its intensity, its prophetic purpose of refining judgment, if the beast is dead and gone for years before returning? It breaks the narrative tension entirely. The very nature of the Great Tribulation is its uninterrupted, unmitigated outpouring of wrath. If the Antichrist is defeated at year 6, disappears into a pit for years, and then comes back, I mean, the world experiences a bizarre interlude of peace that completely contradicts the escalating judgments of Revelation?
It doesn't contradict Revelation, it actually fulfills it. You're assuming the tribulation's intensity relies solely on the Antichrist. It doesn't. The trumpet judgments are environmental and cosmic. Furthermore, that absence of the beast is exactly what allows for a crucial prophetic event, the rebuilding of the temple and the ministry of the 2 specific witness groups.
Oh, you're splitting the 2 witnesses from Revelation 11 into groups now?
Yes, because this connects the Antichrist fracture timeline directly to the protagonists of the end times. The traditional model forces the 2 witnesses into the exact same small window as the Antichrist absolute rule. But in the 14-year model, we see distinct eras of witness. During the first 7 years of seals, you have a Moses and Elijah company ministering.
Calling down plagues, shutting up the sky as they did historically.
Exactly. Then, in the second 7 years of trumpets, you have a Joshua and Zerubbabel typology.
For the listeners, Joshua and Zerubbabel were the historical figures who led the rebuilding of the Second Jewish Temple after the Babylonian exile.
Right. So, in the end times, this Joshua and Zerubbabel company oversees the rebuilding of the Third Temple. And they do it during that 1,260-day period when the beast is locked in the pit. The beast's absence isn't a plot hole. It is a prophetic necessity so the temple can be rebuilt in troublous times before the beast ascends again to desecrate it.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. I see the symmetry you're trying to build there, but the book of Revelation explicitly states that the 2 witnesses operate for exactly 1,260 days total, and it places their ministry in direct, simultaneous conflict with the Antichrist reign, climaxing when the beast makes war with them and kills them precisely when he breaks the covenant.
But the text is layered. The 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks.
Even so, splitting the witnesses into a Moses and Elijah company for one 7-year block,
and a Joshua and Zerubbabel company for an entirely separate 7-year block, it fundamentally rewrites the plain text of Revelation 11. It's taking one event and cloning it to fill out the extra years you've added to the timeline.
It doesn't rewrite it, it scales it appropriately to the fractal nature of prophecy. And this scaling is what perfectly aligns the timeline with the Levitical cycles.
The Jubilee cycles.
Yes, according to Leviticus 25, the Israelites would account off 7 Sabbaths of years. 7 times 7 years, which is 49 years. The 50th year is the Jubilee. It's the ultimate reset. Debts are forgiven, property is returned, captives are freed.
Right. It is a beautiful picture of the millennial kingdom.
Exactly. It perfectly kicks off the millennial reign. But here is the crux of the argument. The 14th year of this expanded timeline aligns beautifully with the 49th year of that Leviticus 25 cycle. You cannot achieve this perfect mathematical harmony of the Levitical Jubilee cycles within a truncated 7-year framework. The 14-year model lands you perfectly on the Jubilee.
Okay, let me make sure I understand the math here. You're saying the 14th year of your timeline also functions as the 49th year of the broader Jubilee cycle in order to trigger the 50th year reset.
Correct. It synchronizes the end of the tribulation with the broader calendar of Israel.
To me, that feels like adjusting a balance sheet to hide a missing ledger entry.
How is perfectly aligning with Leviticus a missing ledger entry?
Because it requires massive mathematical gymnastics, suggesting that the 14th year has to act as a dual 49th year just to make the Jubilee math work is injecting complexity where the text simply doesn't demand it. The traditional sequence is infinitely more coherent. You have 7 years of tribulation fulfilling Daniel's 70th week, followed immediately by a literal 1,000-year reign where Christ sits on the throne of David.
But that ignores the structural patterns God established in the Old Testament.
No, it fulfills them without needing to bend the numbers. The 7-year model requires no complex calendar offsets. It requires no dual-year overlays where year 14 is also year 49. It requires no 50-day preludes inserted before the clock even starts just to account for Luke's gospel.
You say bend the numbers, I say synchronize the patterns.
The simplicity of a 7-year tribulation honors the straightforward reading of Daniel. It respects the 3.5-year reign of a human antichrist, followed immediately by a 3.5-year satanic reign. It provides the most logically consistent and historically grounded framework for students of prophecy. You don't have to explain why the Antichrist takes a 3.5-year vacation in the middle of the Great Tribulation.
And I maintain that this simplicity you are defending is a mirage. It's an illusion created by relying solely on Matthew and ignoring the deep chronological blueprints laid out in Mark and Luke.
I really don't believe we're ignoring them. We're reading them as harmonious accounts rather than consecutive ones.
But by flattening them, you miss the architecture. The 14-year timeline with its 50-day prelude, its distinct eras for different witness groups. Moses and Elijah, then Joshua and Zerubbabel, and its highly specific was, is not, and shall be beast cycle is the only framework that actually honors the fractal complexity of the scriptural text. To reduce the end times to 7 years is to flatten a multidimensional prophetic architecture into a 2-dimensional drawing.
Which brings us right back to our builders and their blueprints. Whether you view biblical prophecy as a highly structured, contiguous bunker of 7 years, or a vast, multi-layered labyrinth spanning 14 years and multiple eras, it is clear that both frameworks represent a staggering amount of deep, technical study. We are both looking at the exact same verses, the exact same historical typologies.
We are, and while we may remain in continued disagreement over whether simplicity or complexity is the true hallmark of biblical prophecy, there is immense value in this debate.
I agree entirely.
Exploring these deeply technical chronological mysteries, wrestling with the mechanics of the Jubilee cycles, parsing the specific Aramaic of Daniel, or analyzing the differing garment colors of the Synoptic Gospels, ultimately sharpens one's own prophetic study. It forces you to actually read the text, not just accept a summary. There is so much more to explore in this material.
Absolutely. The text demands our rigorous attention. We invite you, the listener, to dive deeper into the source material. Look at the frameworks presented by Robert Breaker and Ministry Revealed. Look at the blueprints, study the schematics, and decide for yourself what the architecture of prophecy truly requires. Thank you for joining us on the debate.